Picture this. You've built one of the most prestigious hotels in the city, dedicating years of hard work, passion, and sleepless nights to make it a haven of luxury and warmth. But one day you decide to walk in, dressed like any ordinary guest, jeans, a plain shirt, nothing fancy, just to see your creation through the eyes of a visitor. No VIP greetings, no special treatment. But instead of experiencing the welcoming atmosphere you envisioned, you're met with cold stares, dismissive service, and shocking words from your own staff. And here's the twist. They don't know the woman they're turning away is the very person who signs their paychecks. What would you do if you were Julia Carter, the unseen owner fighting against hidden biases? Stay with us as we unravel Julia's journey, filled with unexpected revelations and the fight for justice and dignity. And while you're here, comment below your city, like this video, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Julia Carter sat in her car, eyes fixed on the grand hotel that stood proudly before her. Crescent Bay Hotel was more than just a building. It was the result of years of tireless dedication, late nights, and unyielding passion. The chandeliers inside sparkled through the wide glass windows, casting brilliant reflections across the polished marble facade. The evening sun bathed the entrance in a golden light, adding to its aura of luxury. Julia felt a swell of pride, but couldn't ignore the undercurrent of anxiety in her chest. Today was different. Today, she wasn't entering as the accomplished owner everyone knew, with staff scrambling to greet her and cater to her every need. No, today, Julia was just another face in the crowd. She had chosen to arrive unannounced and dressed simply, wearing well-worn jeans, a plain white shirt, and sneakers, nothing that hinted at her status. It was time to experience the hotel as any guest would, stripped of the privileges her title afforded. "Is everything truly as perfect as I imagine it to be?" she whispered to herself, fingers tapping the steering wheel nervously. This visit was about more than a surprise inspection. It was a chance to see her hotel through an unfiltered lens, to catch any flaws or attitudes that formal visits might mask. With a determined breath, Julia stepped out of her car and into the welcoming glow of the hotel entrance. The lobby was just as she remembered it, grand, inviting, and buzzing with the soft hum of conversation. The light from the chandeliers created delicate patterns on the marble floor, while the subtle scent of lavender and polished wood drifted through the air. Elegant artwork adorned the walls, and every detail whispered luxury and thoughtfulness. Julia's heart skipped a beat as she stood there, surrounded by the vision she had poured her soul into. For a moment, she let herself soak it in. The soft clinking of glasses from the nearby lounge, the bellhop expertly guiding guests to their rooms, the genuine smile of the concierge as he assisted an elderly couple. Everything appeared flawless, just as she'd hoped. But Julia knew better than to trust appearances alone. She was here to dig deeper, to find out if the warmth she saw was extended to every guest or just those who fit a certain profile. Taking a step forward, she adjusted her simple bag on her shoulder and approached the reception desk. The young man behind it wore a crisp, tailored uniform and tapped away on his computer, absorbed in his task. He didn't glance up as she approached. Julia waited patiently, her heart quickening as seconds turned into a minute. Finally, she cleared her throat lightly, trying to draw his attention without being demanding. The receptionist flicked his eyes up for a split second, barely acknowledging her before returning to his screen. Julia felt a twinge of disappointment, but brushed it aside, reminding herself that this was exactly why she was here, to see firsthand how a guest who appeared unassuming was treated. Julia moves towards the reception desk. She took a deep breath, her pulse steadying as she prepared to engage. "Good evening," she said, her tone warm but measured. Julia stood at the reception desk, absorbing the details around her. The young man behind the counter, whose name tag read Jack, was engrossed in his screen, his fingers tapping away without pause. She waited, giving him a moment, but as seconds turned into a minute, her patience wore thin. Clearing her throat gently, she said, "Good evening. I'd like to check in, please." Jack's eyes lifted for a brief moment, scanning her from head to toe. The look wasn't one of recognition or welcome. It was an assessment, quick and dismissive. His gaze settled on her worn jeans and simple white shirt, and Julia could almost hear his unspoken judgment. "Do you have a reservation?" he asked, the practiced courtesy in his voice edged with indifference. "No, I was hoping to book a room for tonight," Julia replied, keeping her tone composed. The soft murmur of conversations in the lobby and the clinking of glasses in the lounge served as a stark contrast to the chill in this exchange. Jack clicked around on his computer for what felt like an obligatory search, his face impassive. Julia's eyes darted to the guest ledger beside him, noting the open slots clearly marked for available rooms. After a moment he looked up, a rehearsed sigh escaping his lips. "I'm afraid we're quite full tonight, ma'am. You might have better luck at another hotel nearby." Julia felt a pang of disbelief, but she forced a polite smile. "Are you certain? I only need a standard room. I'd be happy to take any available option." Jack's jaw tightened, his gaze shifting as if to convey that this conversation was over. "As I mentioned, we're fully booked," he repeated, his tone more curt now, as though dealing with her had become a burden. Julia's heart tightened at the subtle condescension. This wasn't just about her. It was about what this behavior meant for every guest who walked in without the veneer of wealth or prestige. Julia took a deep breath, willing her frustration to stay beneath the surface. It was tempting to reveal who she was, to make this indifferent receptionist scramble with apologies. But she resisted. This was bigger than her own experience. It was about ensuring that every guest was treated with the dignity they deserved. "I see," Julia said, maintaining her composure. "Would it be possible for you to double-check? I'm willing to pay the going rate, whatever it may be." Jack's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Julia thought he might comply. Instead, he glanced over her shoulder, as if searching for a more worthwhile guest. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, with a finality that brooked no argument. "There's nothing available." Julia's fingers clenched the strap of her bag. The room ledger was still visible to her, its open slots a glaring contradiction. But this moment was not about confrontation. It was about revelation. "Thank you for your time," she said, her voice steady but lined with disappointment. Turning away, she felt the weight of the exchange settle in her chest. She stepped aside, letting another guest approach the desk. This time, Jack's demeanor shifted. He greeted the new arrival, a well-dressed couple, with a smile, his voice warm and accommodating. Julia watched, a mix of sadness and resolve hardening within her. If this was how the staff treated someone like her, how many others had faced the same thinly veiled bias? Determined to uncover more, Julia moved across the polished marble floor, her footsteps echoing lightly. The entrance to the hotel's restaurant stood ahead, promising another layer of insight. She glanced back at the reception area, where Jack was now animatedly speaking with another guest, his laughter genuine, his service impeccable. A small, bitter smile tugged at Julia's lips. This wasn't about her personal affront, it was about the principle. With her heart beating a touch faster, she straightened her posture and walked into the restaurant, ready for the next encounter and what it might reveal about her beloved hotel's true culture. Julia stepped into the restaurant, the scent of fresh herbs and grilled delicacies wafting through the air. The space was warm, with soft lighting casting an inviting glow over the tables set with pristine white linens and polished silverware. It was a place designed to make guests feel special. But as Julia took in the room, her eyes sharpened, focusing on the interactions around her. To her right, A couple dressed in tailored suits and designer dresses were being escorted to their seats with wide smiles from the staff. Their server approached promptly, offering a warm greeting and menus. Across the room, a man in casual attire, jeans and a t-shirt, sat alone at a corner table. His server's expression was polite but distant, the service noticeably less attentive. Julia noted the subtle differences. The guests who radiated wealth received extra care and friendliness, while others received only the bare minimum. Julia's heart sank as she connected these small acts of favoritism with the experience she'd had at the reception. The vision she had for Crescent Bay Hotel was crumbling before her eyes, replaced by an unspoken hierarchy that rewarded appearances over humanity. Gathering herself, Julia approached the hostess stand. The young woman behind it, with perfectly styled hair and a sleek uniform, barely glanced up as Julia stepped forward. "Good evening," Julia said with a polite smile. "I'd like a table for one, please." The hostess finally looked at her, eyes quickly assessing Julia's simple outfit. Her expression was neutral but carried a faint air of superiority. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her tone businesslike. "No, I was hoping to see if there was a table available," Julia replied, glancing at the room dotted with empty spots. The hostess sighed lightly, her eyes darting to the open tables before returning to Julia. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we're fully booked tonight." Julia's eyes flickered with disbelief. She could see at least 5 unoccupied tables, ready for guests. "Are you sure? I'm more than willing to wait a bit if needed," she said, keeping her voice even and kind. The hostess's polite mask slipped for a moment, revealing impatience. "As I mentioned, we are at full capacity. I suggest checking one of the cafes nearby." Julia felt a tight knot of frustration form in her chest, but she nodded. "Thank you," she said softly, stepping aside. She watched as another couple walked in, dressed in expensive suits and dresses. They approached the hostess, who greeted them with a radiant smile and seated them at one of the very tables Julia had just been told was unavailable. The bitter taste of reality settled in her mouth. It was now undeniable that a pattern of bias ran deeper than she feared. Still standing by the entrance, Julia's observations were interrupted by a voice behind her. "Ma'am, is there an issue?" Turning around, she saw 2 uniformed security guards with serious expressions approaching her. One of them, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard, addressed her again. "We've been informed that you're causing a disturbance." Julia blinked in disbelief. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. I was just waiting to see if there was a table available," she said, her voice steady but carrying a hint of exasperation. The guard's stance relaxed slightly, but his expression remained firm. "The management prefers that we maintain a comfortable environment for all guests. If there's nothing we can assist you with, we may need to ask you to step outside." Julia's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. The glances from nearby patrons, the whispers, she felt them all piercing her confidence. Here she was, in her own hotel, being treated as if she were an unwelcome intruder. The urge to reveal her identity surged within her, to make these guards and staff realize their mistake. But she held back. Exposing herself now would cut her investigation short. Instead, she nodded slowly. "Understood," she said, meeting the guard's eyes with a steady gaze. She turned and walked toward the main lobby, each step heavy with a mix of humiliation and newfound determination. As Julia stepped out into the cool evening air, the reality of what she had just witnessed settled heavily on her. This was more than a one-time oversight or isolated incident. This was a culture, a behavior ingrained in her hotel's staff, and it needed to be rooted out. Pulling out her phone, Julia dialed Emma, her trusted assistant. Emma picked up on the first ring. "Julia, everything okay?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. "No," Julia replied, her tone firm yet measured. "We have a serious problem, Emma. I need you to meet me first thing tomorrow morning. We're going to start digging into this, and I want every detail." Emma's response was immediate. "Understood. I'll prepare everything we need." As Julia ended the call, she stood under the glow of the hotel's lights, feeling a wave of determination wash over her. This was her hotel, her legacy, and she would fight to make sure it became the inclusive, welcoming place she had always envisioned. The next morning, Julia sat in her office, the first rays of sunlight barely peeking through the large windows. A sense of urgency simmered beneath her calm exterior as she glanced over notes she had scrawled down the previous night. The soft knock on the door snapped her attention back, and Emma stepped in, her face already clouded with concern. "Morning, Julia," Emma said, placing a folder thick with documents on the table. "I gathered everything I could: guest feedback, complaint records, and staff performance reviews." Julia nodded, gratitude softening her stern expression. "Let's get to work," she said, gesturing for Emma to take a seat. As they sifted through the paperwork, a pattern began to emerge. The complaints were subtle but consistent. Guests who were dressed more casually or appeared less affluent noted feeling overlooked or treated dismissively. Julia's eyes narrowed as she read one guest's account of being ignored at the reception desk and another being told the restaurant was full despite seeing empty tables, stories eerily similar to her own experience. "This isn't just one or two instances," Emma said, her voice tight with anger. "It's systemic." Julia took a deep breath, the reality sinking in like a stone. The very culture she had strived to build, rooted in warmth and inclusivity, was being eroded from within. "It's worse than I thought," she whispered. Emma leaned forward, eyes glistening with a determination that mirrored Julia's. "I spoke to Maria, one of the longest-serving housekeepers. She's agreed to come in and talk to us. She might know where this started." A few moments later, Maria entered the office. The older woman's hands fidgeted with the hem of her uniform, but her eyes carried a quiet resilience. Julia offered her a warm smile. "Thank you for coming, Maria. Your voice matters, and we appreciate your honesty." Maria nodded, taking a seat. "I love working here, Miss Carter," she began, her voice wavering. "But I've seen things change over the years." Julia exchanged a glance with Emma before speaking. "What kind of changes, Maria?" The housekeeper's gaze dropped to her hands. "It started with Mr. Lawson. He never outright said anything discriminatory, but he made it known who deserved the best service and who didn't. It was, in his words, the way he praised staff for going out of their way for important guests, but overlooked good service for others." Emma leaned forward. "So it was subtle, but everyone knew." Maria nodded. "We were told to prioritize guests who fit the brand image." Over time, it wasn't just implied, it was expected. Julia felt a knot form in her stomach. It wasn't just negligence, it was a culture reinforced and encouraged by Mr. Lawson. "Did anyone try to challenge him?" she asked, already suspecting the answer. Maria's eyes darted up, briefly meeting Julia's before returning to her lap. A few did, but they were either dismissed or found themselves working the less desirable shifts. People learned to follow the unspoken rules or stay silent. Julia's expression hardened, but she reached out to touch Maria's hand lightly. "Thank you for your bravery, Maria. This is exactly what we need to move forward." After Maria left, Julia turned to Emma. "It's time to dig deeper. We need to know if this behavior stopped at attitudes or if it's affecting more areas." Emma nodded, her fingers already flying across her laptop keyboard. "I'll pull financial records and internal memos." An hour passed as they searched, and then Emma froze, eyes widening. "Julia, you need to see this," she said, turning the laptop toward her boss. On the screen were records of transactions that seemed odd, small amounts siphoned off over time, but they added up to a significant sum. Julia's brows knit as she examined the details. The payments had been routed to accounts not listed under the hotel's departments. "Who owns these accounts?" she asked, a cold suspicion forming. Emma clicked through a few more files before stopping. "They're linked to Mr. Lawson," she said, her voice low. The revelation hit Julia like a punch to the gut. It was bad enough that Mr. Lawson was subtly orchestrating a culture of discrimination, but this? Embezzlement was a criminal offense. "This explains a lot," she muttered, scanning the financial trail. It's why certain guests were given preferential treatment. Keeping the image up benefited him in more ways than one. Emma's jaw clenched. He's been using his influence to funnel money while maintaining an elitist atmosphere. Julia pushed back in her chair, staring at the ceiling as a plan began to form. She wouldn't confront Mr. Lawson without irrefutable evidence. She needed to present this to the board and make sure the next steps were airtight. With a decisive nod, Julia stood up. "We need to document everything. I'll contact Mr. Thorne from the board. He's someone I trust. We need him on our side before this becomes public." Emma smiled, a hint of relief breaking through her tense expression. "I'm with you, Julia. Let's take this all the way." Julia picked up the phone, her resolve solidifying. The fight wasn't over, but now she knew where the battle lines were drawn. Mr. Lawson had built a culture of discrimination and deceit, and she would make sure he faced the consequences. The boardroom of Crescent Bay Hotel was bathed in the soft glow of morning light filtering through the large windows. Julia sat at the head of the long mahogany table, the documentation spread neatly in front of her. Next to her sat Mr. Thorne, a long-time board member known for his integrity and commitment to fairness. He gave Julia a subtle nod, a signal of support that strengthened her resolve. Moments later, the door opened and Mr. Lawson entered, his confident stride and polished appearance belying the storm about to descend on him. His smile was practiced, eyes scanning the room with an air of complacency. "Good morning, Miss Carter. Mr. Thorne," he said smoothly as he took a seat. Julia met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for joining us, Mr. Lawson. This meeting concerns serious matters that have come to my attention regarding your conduct." Mr. Lawson's smile faltered slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face before he quickly composed himself. "I'm always here to assist in any way I can, Miss Carter." Julia leaned forward, sliding the folder of documents toward Mr. Lawson. "Over the past few weeks, I have conducted an investigation into the culture of this hotel and the treatment of our guests. What I discovered was troubling." Mr. Lawson's eyes flicked to the folder but didn't open it. "Troubling? I assure you the standards we uphold—" "Save it," Julia interrupted, her voice steady and sharp. "I have statements from guests who felt dismissed and unwelcome, and testimonies from staff who were pressured to prioritize certain types of guests over others. But that's only the beginning." Mr. Thorne's face hardened, and he crossed his arms as Julia continued. "In addition, we uncovered financial discrepancies. Funds from the hotel have been quietly siphoned off into accounts under your control. This isn't just a breach of trust, it's embezzlement." A bead of sweat appeared on Mr. Lawson's brow. His confident veneer cracked as he picked up the folder and quickly scanned the top page. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, his voice wavering. "Any transfers were for discretionary purposes, to maintain the hotel's image and attract the right clientele." Julia's eyes narrowed. "So, you admit to funneling money from the hotel's accounts for purposes that were not authorized?" Mr. Lawson's eyes darted between Julia and Mr. Thorne, searching for any sign of sympathy. "I was acting in the best interest of Crescent Bay. Ensuring the right type of guest experience was maintained was crucial for our reputation." Mr. Thorne cleared his throat, his tone icy. And did that include promoting a culture where guests were judged and treated differently based on appearance or perceived wealth? Mr. Lawson opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The silence stretched as Julia pushed forward. We have records, statements, and financial trails, Mr. Lawson. Your attempt to protect your image and the hotel's brand has compromised everything we stand for. And worse, you've profited personally at the expense of our integrity. Defeated, Mr. Lawson's shoulders slumped. I never meant for it to go this far, he muttered, the fight in him extinguished. Julia stood, the weight of responsibility pressing on her but making her stance stronger. Mr. Lawson, effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties. We will be pursuing all necessary legal actions, including charges for embezzlement. Mr. Lawson's face turned pale, and he struggled to form a response, but Julia's resolve was unshakable. This hotel was built on the principle that every guest is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their background. You've betrayed that vision. Mr. Thorne nodded in agreement, his expression one of both sadness and determination. This is a hard day for Crescent Bay, but it's also an opportunity to restore what makes us great. Julia, I'm with you in making these changes. Julia's eyes softened momentarily as she met Mr. Thorne's gaze. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. We'll start by implementing new training programs focused on inclusivity and respect. We will review all policies and ensure that no one feels marginalized in our hotel ever again. Mr. Lawson stood shakily, avoiding their eyes as he gathered his things. The silence in the room was deafening as he walked out, his once assured steps now hesitant and heavy. Julia watched him go, the mixture of disappointment and relief settling in her chest. When the door clicked shut behind Mr. Lawson, Julia exhaled, the tension leaving her shoulders. Mr. Thorne uncrossed his arms and leaned in. Julia, today was tough but necessary. Where do we go from here? Julia allowed herself a brief smile. We start by rebuilding trust from the ground up. We'll need to bring in external consultants to help restructure our training and address the underlying issues. Emma and I have already started drafting a plan. Mr. Thorne nodded, a spark of hope lighting his eyes. I'll back you in presenting this to the board. Let's ensure Crescent Bay becomes the symbol of inclusivity and hospitality you always envisioned. Julia's gaze drifted to the window, where sunlight bathed the lobby below. Guests moved about, some chatting, others checking in, all unaware of the shift that had just begun in the very walls they occupied. We have a long way to go, she said softly, but with a note of conviction. But today we made the first step. With that, Julia felt a sense of closure, not just for the confrontation, but for the deeper issue that had threatened everything she worked for. She knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in weeks, hope outweighed the weight of disappointment. The days following Mr. Lawson's departure were a whirlwind of change. Julia sat in her office, surrounded by a team of consultants and senior staff members, mapping out a comprehensive plan for transformation. We're not just changing policies, Julia said, her voice steady and resolute. We're rebuilding the culture from the ground up. Emma sat across from her, nodding as she scribbled notes. The new training programs would emphasize respect, empathy, and inclusivity. Staff at all levels would participate, from receptionists to managers. The hotel would implement workshops, role-playing exercises, and open discussions designed to challenge biases and promote an understanding of true hospitality. By the end of the week, the first session commenced in the main conference room. Julia stood at the front, addressing a mix of curious and apprehensive faces. This hotel was founded on the belief that everyone deserves the highest level of service and respect, regardless of who they are or where they come from. We're here to make sure that vision is a reality, she began. The room was silent, but as she spoke, Julia saw heads nodding and eyes brightening with realization. As the weeks passed, the training sessions bore fruit. The shifts were subtle at first: a warmer greeting at the reception desk, more attentive service in the restaurant, and staff who took an extra moment to ensure each guest felt valued. Emma moved through the hotel daily, observing interactions and speaking with staff. "The difference is palpable," she told Julia one afternoon. "People are engaging more, and there's a new energy in the air." Julia saw it too. Housekeeping staff, who once hurried through their work to meet tight schedules, now exchanged smiles and greetings with guests in the hallways. Servers in the restaurant stopped to ask if patrons needed anything more, whether they wore suits or casual jeans. Even the concierge, known for his curt efficiency, had adopted a friendlier demeanor. The feedback from guests began to reflect these changes. Comment cards left in the lobby praised the attentive service and welcoming atmosphere. One guest wrote, "I've been staying at Crescent Bay for years, and I've never felt as cared for as I do now. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." The staff, once burdened by unwritten rules of selective service, felt a weight lift. Maria, the long-time housekeeper who had spoken up, confided in Julia during one of her rounds. "It feels different now, Miss Carter. It feels like the place you always wanted it to be." One afternoon, Julia stood in the center of the lobby, watching the familiar yet revitalized scene unfold before her. A family with young children was checking in, their laughter echoing across the polished marble floor. Nearby, an elderly couple in modest clothes was being offered assistance by a bellhop who carried their bags with genuine care. Julia's heart swelled as she saw a guest wearing simple attire being greeted with the same warmth as a high-profile businessman. It was proof that the culture had started to shift. The changes were more than just surface level. They were woven into the very fabric of how her staff interacted and saw one another. Emma approached, holding a guest comment card. "You should read this one," she said with a smile. Julia took the card and read aloud. "Thank you for making me feel seen and valued. It's a rare thing these days, and it means more than words can say." Julia's eyes glistened, and she let out a soft sigh of satisfaction. As the sun dipped low, casting the lobby in a warm golden hue, Julia took a moment to reflect. The journey had been challenging, filled with moments of doubt and heartache. But here she stood, surrounded by the hum of conversations, the sound of footsteps, and the quiet, steady beat of progress. Crescent Bay Hotel had become a symbol of what it should always have been, an emblem of respect, inclusivity, and genuine hospitality. Julia felt a profound sense of fulfillment, not just for reclaiming the spirit of her hotel, but for ensuring its future was brighter than ever. Emma turned to her. "Ready for what's next?" she asked. Julia nodded, a smile breaking across her face. "More than ever," she said, feeling the weight of past challenges dissolve into anticipation for what lay ahead. The hotel wasn't just hers, it was a testament to the power of resilience and the belief that true change is possible. With a final glance around, Julia walked forward, ready for the new chapter of her journey. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this story. Your time and engagement mean everything to us. If you enjoyed this story and found it inspiring, please give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and remind us of the power of resilience and integrity. Until next time, take care and stay inspired.